It was a warm Friday evening, the kind of night when the city lights reflected beautifully off the restaurant's glass windows. Inside, the tables at the Silver Fork glowed under golden lamps, and the soft music in the background made everything feel calm and elegant. The smell of roasted garlic, butter, and herbs filled the air. The restaurant was one of those places where people came not just to eat, but to show off their wealth and style. Among the busy servers moving between tables was a young waitress named Lily. She had been working there for almost a year now, saving every dollar she could. Her dream was simple but strong. She wanted to study music full-time again, something she had to pause when her father passed away. For now, she worked long hours, sometimes skipping her own dinner to make ends meet. Lily wore her neat uniform, a white shirt, black apron, and her hair tied back in a bun. Her shoes were slightly worn but polished. She always smiled when serving guests, no matter how tired she felt. Most customers were kind enough. Some ignored her completely, treating her like part of the background. She was used to that. That night, though, something felt different. The air buzzed louder than usual. The manager told the staff that a special group had made a reservation, a group of wealthy business people celebrating some big deal. They were known to spend a lot of money and tip well, so everyone had to be extra careful. When the guests arrived, their laughter filled the room before they even reached their table. There were 4 of them, 2 men and 2 women dressed in expensive clothes and smelling of strong perfume and cologne. The men wore shiny watches that caught the light every time they moved their hands. The women had diamond earrings that sparkled like small stars. Lily greeted them with her best smile. "Good evening, welcome to the Silver Fork. My name is Lily. I'll be taking care of you tonight." One of the men didn't bother looking at her. "Yeah, fine. Just bring us your best red wine," he said, waving his hand as if she were invisible. The other woman smirked. "And make sure it's not cheap. We only drink quality here." Lily nodded politely, even though the tone stung a little. "Of course, ma'am. I'll bring the wine list so you can choose." They laughed among themselves. "Just pick something expensive," one of the men said, his voice full of mockery. When Lily returned with the bottle, she carefully poured a little into the glass for tasting, just like she was trained to do. The man took a sip, swirled it dramatically, then gave her a sarcastic grin. "Not bad. I guess even a waitress can get something right." The group chuckled. Lily forced a small smile, her cheeks warming. She'd faced rude customers before, but something about this group was sharper, crueler. Throughout the night, the comments kept coming. When she brought the main dishes, one of the women looked at her from head to toe and said loudly, "You know, I could never imagine doing this kind of job. Carrying plates all night? My feet would fall off." The others laughed. Lily felt her throat tighten. "It's not so bad once you get used to it," she said softly, setting the plates down carefully. "Used to it?" The man replied with a chuckle. "You mean used to people bossing you around all day?" Lily tried to stay calm. "I just like making sure our guests enjoy their evening," she said gently, but they didn't stop. Every small mistake, whether it was a napkin folded the wrong way or a glass not perfectly centered, became a reason for another joke. The manager passed by a few times, glanced at the table, and quickly looked away. He didn't want to upset the rich guests. Later in the evening, Lily was refilling one of the glasses when someone bumped into her from behind. A few drops of wine splashed on the white tablecloth. She froze. The man sitting closest looked down at the tiny stain and let out a loud laugh. "Well, I guess this is what happens when you hire amateurs." Lily's heart sank. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll replace the cloth right away." The woman next to him added with a sneer, "You should be. That wine probably costs more than your weekly paycheck." A few nearby diners turned to look. Lily felt every pair of eyes on her. She wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole. Still, she took a deep breath, apologized again, and went to get a new cloth. Her hands trembled slightly as she returned to the table. The guests didn't stop whispering and laughing while she cleaned. She could hear snippets of their conversation, mocking her posture, her uniform, even her voice. When she finally stepped away, she went straight to the back hallway, where staff took short breaks. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes for a moment. Her chest ached. She wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of being treated like she didn't matter. Tired of pretending rude words didn't hurt, but she wasn't the kind of person who talked back. Her father had always taught her, kindness shows strength. not weakness. She repeated those words silently in her head until the sting of humiliation faded a little. Another waitress walked by and gave her a sympathetic look. "You okay, Lily?" "Yeah," Lily lied, smiling faintly. "Just a long night." She fixed her hair in the small mirror, straightened her apron, and went back to the floor. The rich guests were laughing again, probably at something else now. She walked past them quietly, focusing on her other tables. Some of her regular customers smiled at her and thanked her warmly. That helped her mood a little. As the night went on, the laughter from the corner table got louder. They were clearly enjoying themselves, but at others' expense. The manager even came over to compliment them on their business success, acting as if their behavior was completely fine. Lily just stayed out of the way. When it was finally time for dessert, the group ordered the most expensive options: chocolate soufflé, crème brûlée, and a special imported fruit platter. Lily carefully brought everything to the table, her hands steady despite her tiredness. One of the men took a spoonful of dessert and said with a smirk, "At least your chef knows what he's doing." "Guess someone here has talent." His friends laughed again. Lily's smile didn't falter. "I'll let the kitchen know you enjoyed it," she said politely. When she brought the check, one of the women opened her designer purse and said, "Here's a tip. Sweetheart, find a real job." She tossed a few coins onto the table. They jingled against the surface, sharp and cold. Lily froze for a moment, her throat tight. Then she nodded slightly. "Thank you, ma'am. Have a good night." The group burst into laughter as they left. As soon as the door closed behind them, Lily let out a shaky breath. She picked up the coins quietly and put them in the tip jar. It wasn't about the money. It was the disrespect that stung the most. The restaurant began to empty after that. The lights dimmed, the music softened, and the last customers paid their bills. Lily helped clear tables, her body aching but her movements steady. When everything was finally clean, she took off her apron and sat at a corner table for a few minutes, sipping a glass of water. The place felt peaceful now, almost too quiet. She looked at the piano near the entrance, an elegant black grand piano that stood mostly unused. The restaurant sometimes hired musicians for special occasions, but most nights it just sat there, silent and polished. Lily smiled faintly. She used to play the piano every day. Before her father's illness forced her to take extra work, music was still a part of her, even if it wasn't visible to the world anymore. Sometimes after everyone left, she would touch the keys softly, just to feel that connection again. That night, as she looked at the piano, something stirred inside her, a quiet reminder of who she really was beneath the uniform and tired smile. She stood up, gathered her things, and walked toward the door. As she turned off the lights, the restaurant reflected her faint shadow across the shiny floor. The laughter from the wealthy guests was gone, but their words lingered in her mind. Still, she told herself that tomorrow was another day. She would show up again, do her job, and keep her head high. What she didn't know was that fate had already planned something unexpected for her, something that would soon turn those cruel laughs into stunned silence, and it would all begin with that quiet, waiting piano. The morning sunlight slipped through the curtains of Lily's small apartment. The sound of city buses and distant horns filled the air. She sat at the tiny wooden table by the window, sipping instant coffee and staring at the notes she had written the night before, small reminders of bills to pay, grocery lists, and her work schedule for the week. Her body still felt sore from the long shift, but her mind was heavier than her limbs. The laughter from those rich guests still echoed in her memory. She tried not to think about it, but it had stuck like a splinter. No matter how much she told herself to move on, the words still hurt. She took a deep breath and reminded herself, it's just another day. Keep going. That was something she always said when things got tough. After finishing her coffee, she put on her uniform, tied her hair neatly, and headed to work. The morning breeze was cool, brushing against her face as she walked. She liked that part of the day, the quiet before the restaurant filled with noise, clinking glasses, and people in a hurry. When she reached the Silver Fork, the kitchen lights were already on. The chefs were preparing ingredients, chopping vegetables, and arranging trays. The smell of fresh bread baking drifted through the air. The manager was standing near the counter, checking the reservation list. "Morning," Lily greeted softly as she walked in. The manager looked up and gave her a polite nod. "Morning. We've got a busy weekend ahead. A charity gala tomorrow night, so we need everyone at their best." "A gala?" she asked. "Yes, it's a big event. Some of the same guests from last night will be there too," he said without much emotion. The owner wants everything perfect. Lily's stomach tightened a little at that. She didn't want to face those people again. Not after how they treated her. But she couldn't say no. She needed the hours and she needed the pay. "Got it," she said quietly. She tied her apron and started setting the tables for lunch, polishing glasses, folding napkins, placing silverware. All the small details that guests usually didn't notice but made a big difference. As she worked, she tried to distract herself by humming a soft tune under her breath. It was an old melody her father used to play on the piano. She could almost hear his voice saying, "Music will always find you, no matter where you are." That thought made her smile faintly. Later that afternoon, the restaurant owner, Mr. Lewis, walked in. He was a kind man in his 50s who had known Lily since she started working there. He was firm but fair, always treating his staff with respect. "Lily," he called. "Yes, sir? About tomorrow's gala. We'll need some help serving the guests and managing the stage area. The pianist we hired just called in sick, so we might have to find someone new." Lily's eyes drifted toward the grand piano near the entrance. She hesitated, wondering if she should say something. But she quickly stopped herself. It had been months since she'd played seriously, and she didn't want to seem overconfident. Mr. Lewis sighed. "I'll see if I can find a replacement by tonight. Otherwise, we'll have to run the event without music." Lily nodded and went back to work. The rest of the day passed quickly. She served customers, cleared tables, and tried not to think about tomorrow. When her shift finally ended, she stayed behind for a while, helping clean the dining area. The restaurant was quiet again, the kind of peaceful silence that came only after a long, busy day. As she wiped the tables near the piano, she couldn't help but glance at the instrument. The black surface reflected the dim lights above. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly lifted the cover and touched the keys. Her fingers rested on them like they had 1,000 times before. She pressed one softly. The note rang through the empty restaurant, pure and gentle, then another, and another. Within seconds, her hands began to move naturally, as if they remembered what her heart had tried to forget. The melody flowed out effortlessly. It wasn't loud or showy, it was calm, graceful, and full of feeling. Mr. Lewis, who was locking up near the door, turned around when he heard the music. He stood quietly, watching her play. When she finished, she turned around, startled to see him there. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, embarrassed. "I just wanted to make sure it still works." He smiled softly. "It works beautifully. And so do you," Lily blushed. "I haven't played in a long time." "Well," he said, walking closer, "you might not believe this, but I think you just solved my problem. How would you feel about playing at tomorrow's gala?" Her eyes widened. "Me? Play for the guests?" "Yes, you clearly know what you're doing. And honestly, after hearing that, I can't imagine anyone else performing." She hesitated. "I don't know, sir. I'm not a professional anymore." "It's been years," he smiled reassuringly. "Sometimes talent doesn't fade, it just waits." "Think about it, Lily, it might be good for you." She stood there in silence, her mind racing. The idea both excited and scared her. Facing those rich guests again wasn't something she wanted. But the thought of playing the piano in front of people again, really playing, felt like a spark in her chest. "I'll think about it," she said softly. That night, when she got home, she couldn't stop thinking about what he said. She looked at her small electric keyboard in the corner of her apartment. Dust had gathered on it, but it still worked fine. She sat down and turned it on. Her fingers trembled at first, but soon the familiar rhythm came back. Hours passed without her noticing. She played softly, letting her emotions flow through the music. Every note told a story, of tired nights, lost dreams, and quiet hope. She thought of her father again. He used to tell her, "Music isn't about being perfect. It's about being real." And she knew then that she had to do it. Not for the guests. Not even for the manager or the restaurant. She had to do it for herself, for the girl she used to be before life got hard. The next day, she arrived early. The restaurant was buzzing with preparations for the gala. Staff members moved quickly, setting up lights, arranging flowers, and polishing the silverware. The tables were covered with white cloths and crystal glasses that sparkled under the chandeliers. Mr. Lewis saw her walk in and smiled. "Morning, Lily, so have you decided?" She nodded slowly. "I'll play. He clapped his hands once. That's wonderful. I knew you would. As the day went on, she helped with the setup but kept glancing at the piano. Her heart pounded every time she imagined the moment she'd have to sit down and perform. When evening finally arrived, the restaurant transformed into something magical. Soft golden lights filled the room. Candles flickered on every table, and the scent of fresh roses mixed with the aroma of fine food. Guests started arriving in their glamorous outfits, smiling and chatting loudly, and among them were the same people from the other night, the ones who had mocked her. They didn't recognize her at first, dressed neatly in a black gown instead of her usual uniform. She moved quietly through the crowd, making sure everything was in order before the event began. They laughed and talked just like before, unaware that the same waitress they had humiliated was about to step onto the small stage. When it was time, the lights dimmed slightly. Mr. Lewis took the microphone and welcomed everyone. "Thank you for joining us tonight for this special evening of generosity and music," he said warmly. "Unfortunately, our pianist had to cancel last minute, but we're very lucky to have one of our own staff step in." He gestured toward the piano. "Please welcome Lily." All heads turned toward her. Some faces looked surprised, others curious. She could feel her heart racing so fast she thought everyone might hear it. But she took a deep breath, walked gracefully to the piano, and sat down. For a moment, the entire room was silent. The same wealthy guests who had laughed at her stared in disbelief. Then, with steady hands, she placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The first notes floated through the air, soft and pure, like a gentle breeze brushing through leaves. Conversation stopped. Glasses were set down. Even the waiters paused. Lily closed her eyes and let the music speak. Every chord carried emotion, sadness, strength, hope, and beauty all at once. It wasn't just a performance. It was her story unfolding in sound, and as she played, the crowd slowly began to realize that the quiet waitress they had overlooked was far more than they had ever imagined. The first few notes seemed to float in the air like they had a life of their own. Lily's fingers moved gracefully across the keys, each sound blending into the next as though the piano was breathing with her. The soft lights reflected off the polished surface, and for a few seconds, time itself felt slower. The melody was gentle at first, filled with warmth and calm. Then, as she gained confidence, her hands began to move faster. The music rose and fell like waves on a quiet sea. Every note seemed to tell a story, one of struggle, kindness, loss, and hope. At first, the guests simply listened, maybe out of curiosity. They had come expecting background music, nothing more. But within minutes, the room began to change. Conversations faded. The clinking of silverware stopped. Even the sound of glasses being set down became rare. People turned in their chairs to watch her. Those who had laughed at her before sat still, unsure of what to feel. The man who had mocked her about spilling wine earlier leaned forward slightly, his expression frozen in surprise. The woman who had tossed coins as a tip lowered her eyes slowly, realizing who the performer was. Lily didn't look at them. She didn't need to. Her music wasn't for them, not tonight. She played for herself, for her father, and for all the moments she had hidden her light just to survive. Each note carried the truth she never said out loud. It was as if her heart had finally found a voice again. Mr. Lewis stood near the bar, arms crossed, smiling quietly. He could see the reactions around the room. Some people had tears in their eyes. Others just sat in silence, lost in the melody. The energy had changed completely. What began as a fancy dinner had turned into something deeply human. Lily's fingers glided effortlessly as she transitioned into another song, one that sounded like a memory. The rhythm softened, delicate but full of emotion. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that made it beautiful. At the back of the restaurant, the chef peeked through the door leading to the kitchen. Even the servers stood still, drawn to the music. When the final notes began to fade, the sound lingered in the air for a moment before everything went completely quiet. Then slowly, people began to clap. It started with one or two polite hands, but soon the applause grew louder and louder until the whole room was standing. The sound of clapping filled the restaurant like thunder. Lily blinked in surprise, her chest rising and falling quickly. She hadn't expected that kind of reaction. Her heart was racing, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from joy. She stood up, bowed slightly, and smiled shyly. The crowd continued to cheer, Even the same group of wealthy guests who had mocked her stood looking stunned. The woman with the diamond earrings had a guilty expression. The man who had insulted her before tried to smile but couldn't quite find the right words. When Lily stepped off the small stage, several guests came up to her. "That was amazing," one man said. "You have real talent. Where did you learn to play like that?" Another woman asked, her voice soft with wonder. Lily smiled politely. "Thank you," she said. "I used to study music before life got busy." Mr. Lewis came over and patted her shoulder proudly. "You made tonight special," he said warmly. "I'm so glad you agreed to play." The room slowly returned to normal, but the energy was different now. People were speaking quietly, smiling more. Even the rude guests seemed calmer, almost embarrassed. One of them, the same man who had laughed the loudest before, finally approached her. He looked uncomfortable, holding his glass of wine loosely. "Hey," he started, clearing his throat. "About the other night. We were out of line." Lily looked at him calmly. "It's all right," she said softly. "No, really," he insisted. "We were rude. I guess I just didn't realize, I didn't realize you had that kind of talent." She smiled gently, not out of pride, but kindness. "It's okay. Sometimes people don't see what's behind a uniform." He nodded, eyes downcast. "You're right about that." Then he reached into his pocket and placed a folded note on the piano. "Consider this a real thank you." She didn't even look at it. "Your apology is enough," she said and walked away. Mr. Lewis watched the whole exchange with quiet admiration. He had seen many kinds of people in his restaurant. Those who thought money made them powerful and those who proved that grace was worth more than gold. Tonight he knew which one truly mattered. As the night went on, the guests left one by one, still talking about the performance. Some of them asked if Lily gave lessons or performed anywhere else. She just smiled and shook her head. "No, I just play when I can," she said. When the last table was cleared and the lights dimmed, Lily sat back down at the piano for a moment. Her fingers brushed the keys softly as if saying goodbye. The restaurant was silent now. Only the hum of the ceiling lights filled the room. Mr. Lewis came over carrying 2 cups of tea. He placed one beside her. "You did something special tonight, Lily," he said quietly. "You reminded everyone here that kindness and talent can't be hidden forever." She smiled at him. "I was nervous, but when I started playing, I forgot everything. It just felt right," he nodded. "That's what real art does. It makes people feel something they can't explain." They sat there in silence for a while, sipping their tea. Through the large windows, they could see the reflection of the city lights, shimmering on the street. Lily thought about how strange life could be, how one night she could be humiliated, and the next she could be standing in front of the same people, making them listen with respect. She didn't feel angry anymore. She didn't even want revenge. What she felt was peace. After locking up, she walked home slowly, her mind still full of music. The night air was cool and gentle. The streets were quiet except for the occasional sound of a car passing by. When she reached her apartment, she sat by the window again, looking out at the glowing buildings in the distance. She pulled out an old photo of her father from a small box on the shelf. He was smiling in the picture, sitting by the same piano she had learned on as a child. "I did it, Dad," she whispered softly. "I finally played again." Her eyes filled with tears, but they weren't sad tears. They were the kind that came from relief, like she had finally found herself again. Over the next few days, things at the restaurant felt different. People who had seen her perform treated her with new respect. Even customers who hadn't been at the gala heard about the waitress pianist and asked if she would play again sometime. Mr. Lewis hinted that he might host small live music nights, and Lily could be part of them. She didn't say yes immediately, but the idea made her heart warm. One afternoon, a local journalist came to the restaurant. "Are you the pianist from the charity gala?" she asked with a friendly smile. Lily nodded a little shyly. "I'd love to write a short piece about you," the journalist said. "Your story's inspiring, how you balance work and music and how your performance moved everyone that night." Lily hesitated, unsure how she felt about attention. But after a moment, she said quietly, "If it helps people believe in themselves, then sure." The article came out a few days later, titled "The Waitress Who Played from the Heart." It wasn't dramatic or flashy. It was simple and honest, just like her. People started leaving kind notes at the restaurant saying how her story touched them. Some even mentioned that her courage inspired them to pick up their old hobbies again. Through it all, Lily stayed humble. She kept working, greeting customers with the same gentle smile, never letting the attention change her. One evening, while cleaning the tables, she heard a child pointing at the piano and saying, "That's where the lady played the beautiful song, right?" Lily looked over and smiled. The little girl's eyes sparkled with admiration. "Do you play?" Lily asked her softly. The child nodded shyly. "A little. But I'm not very good." Lily knelt beside her and said kindly, "Keep playing. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to play from your heart." The little girl grinned and ran back to her parents. As Lily stood up and glanced once more at the piano, she realized something. What happened that night wasn't just about proving her worth to anyone else. It was about remembering her own. The piano had always been her voice even when life made her silent, and though she didn't know what would come next, she felt ready for whatever it was, because now she understood that no amount of cruelty or mockery could take away something that truly belonged to her. Her talent, her kindness, and her quiet strength. And as the lights dimmed in the restaurant once again, Lily sat down at the piano, closed her eyes, and began to play. This time, for herself and for the world that was finally ready to listen. The morning after the article came out, Lily woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing again and again. At first, she thought it was just messages from friends at work. But when she finally checked, she was surprised to see dozens of notifications. Messages from people she didn't even know. Some were from strangers saying how her story inspired them. Others said they cried while reading about her. A few even sent short videos of themselves playing the piano again after years of giving up. Lily sat at her kitchen table with her cup of coffee, scrolling slowly, her eyes wide. She wasn't used to that kind of attention. She had never tried to be famous or stand out. She just wanted to make enough to live quietly. But now it seemed her quiet act of courage had reached further than she imagined. Later that day, when she arrived at the Silver Fork, the mood felt lighter. Her coworkers greeted her with smiles and little jokes. "Look who's in the paper," one of them teased playfully, waving a copy of the article. Lily laughed softly, embarrassed. "It's just a small story," she said. Mr. Lewis came out from his office, smiling proudly. "Small or not, it's beautiful. You deserve every bit of it. People don't forget when someone touches their heart." That evening, more guests than usual filled the restaurant. Some were regulars, others were new faces who said they had come after reading about the pianist Waitress. They asked if she would play again, but Lily shook her head shyly. "Maybe another night," she said. Still, after closing, she found herself drawn to the piano again. The restaurant was empty except for a few staff finishing up. She sat down and played quietly. Not for a crowd, just for herself. As her fingers moved, she felt a peace she hadn't known in a long time. Music no longer felt like a dream from the past. It was part of her life again. Over the next few weeks, more people came to the restaurant asking for her. Some wanted to hear her play. Others just wanted to meet her and tell her how much her story meant to them. One evening, a woman approached her after dinner. "I read about you," the woman said kindly. "My daughter wants to give up piano, but I showed her your story. Now she's practicing again." "Thank you." Lily smiled, touched. "That means a lot. Tell her not to give up. Music finds its way back." The woman nodded and left, but her words stayed with Lily all night. Soon after, Mr. Lewis received a call from a local community center. They were hosting a small charity concert and wanted to invite Lily to perform. When he told her, she froze for a moment. "A concert?" she repeated. "I've never played in public like that before. Not since I was young." "You've already done it once," Mr. Lewis reminded her with a smile. "And look how that turned out." She thought about it for a moment. The idea scared her, but it also felt exciting, like another chance to grow. So she agreed. The next week flew by quickly. She practiced every day after work, staying late at the restaurant or playing at home until her fingers ached. She wasn't chasing perfection. She just wanted to be honest in her music. On the night of the concert, she arrived early at the community center. The small stage was decorated with flowers, and the audience slowly filled the seats. Most of them were locals, families, students, older couples, all there to support a good cause. When it was her turn to perform, She stepped onto the stage with calm steps even though her heart was racing. She wore a simple white dress and no jewelry, her hair pulled back neatly. As she sat down at the piano, she closed her eyes for a brief moment and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The first song was one her father used to love, a soft, emotional tune that carried the weight of memories. The second was one she had written herself, full of light and hope. The audience sat in complete silence, listening as if afraid to breathe. Every note felt alive, and the emotion behind it reached everyone in the room. When she finished, there was a long, beautiful pause before the clapping began. Some people stood. Others wiped their eyes. Lily bowed, humbled and grateful. After the concert, several people came up to her, shaking her hand, thanking her, asking about her journey. One man introduced himself as a teacher at a local music school. "If you ever want to teach, we'd love to have you," he said warmly. Lily didn't know what to say. "Thank you," she replied softly, smiling in disbelief. That night, as she walked home, she looked up at the sky. The stars were faint behind the city lights, but she could still see them. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The next morning, when she got to the restaurant, there was a letter waiting for her. It was from one of the wealthy guests who had mocked her that first night. The handwriting was neat but hesitant. "Dear Lily," it began, "I owe you an apology. I behaved terribly when we first met. Watching you perform made me realize how wrong I was to judge someone by their job. I'm truly sorry for how I treated you. You reminded me of something I had forgotten, that every person we meet has a story we don't know. Thank you for opening my eyes." Lily read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in her apron pocket. She didn't need revenge or payback. This simple note meant more than anything else could. Later that day, Mr. Lewis came up to her again. "You keep changing people's hearts, Lily," he said kindly. "That's not something you can learn, it's something you're born with." She laughed softly. "I'm just doing what I love," he smiled. "That's exactly why it works." Weeks turned into months, and life slowly changed for her. She still worked at the restaurant, but now she also played small shows on weekends. The community loved her gentle way and how her music always felt real. She started teaching a few kids in the neighborhood, too. Some came from families who couldn't afford lessons, but she didn't mind. She taught them anyway, saying, music should belong to everyone. Every day she found herself busier but happier. There was something special about watching others discover the same joy she once lost. One afternoon, as she was teaching a young boy how to play his first song, the doorbell rang. A man in a suit stood outside holding an envelope. "Are you Lily?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, a little cautious. "I'm from the City Arts Foundation. We'd like to invite you to perform at our annual winter gala," he said, handing her the invitation. "It's a big event. We think your story would inspire people." Lily blinked in surprise. "Me, perform at a city event?" He smiled. "Yes, your story's already known to many. You represent what art is really about. Sincerity." When he left, Lily stood there holding the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. She couldn't believe how much her life had changed in such a short time. That evening, she sat by her window, the invitation open on her lap. Outside, snow had started to fall, quiet and gentle. She thought about where she had started, the long shifts, the exhaustion, the humiliation she once felt, and how everything had led her here. The journey wasn't easy, but it was real. Every struggle, every tear, had shaped her into the person she had become. She picked up her small keyboard and played a slow, beautiful tune, letting the sound blend with the soft whisper of falling snow. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about sharing something pure, something that could touch hearts just like hers had been touched. As she played, she smiled, remembering that first night when she sat behind the restaurant piano with shaking hands. She never imagined it would change her life. But it did. Not because of fame, but because it brought her back to herself, and deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of her story. There were still more songs to play, more hearts to reach, and more lives to touch. The girl who once stood silent while others laughed had now become the one who made the world listen, not with loud words, but with quiet, honest music that came straight from the soul. The night of the winter gala arrived faster than Lily expected. The city was wrapped in a quiet layer of snow, and the streets glowed with soft golden lights. People were walking in groups dressed warmly, laughing and taking photos near the tall Christmas tree downtown. Lily stood backstage at the grand hall, her heart beating fast as she looked through the curtain. The hall was filled with people, artists, guests, and families from all over the city. The stage lights made the room shine beautifully, and the sound of soft chatter filled the air. She had been invited as the final performer of the night. It was hard to believe. Only a few months ago she was a quiet waitress trying to make ends meet, and now she was about to perform in front of hundreds of people. Mr. Lewis and a few of her co-workers had come to support her. They sat in the audience, smiling proudly whenever she peeked out. One of the organizers came up to her backstage. "Are you ready?" he asked kindly. She nodded, though her hands were trembling a little. "Yes," she said quietly. The announcer walked up to the microphone and spoke to the crowd. "Our final performer tonight has a story that touched many hearts. Once a waitress at a small restaurant, she reminded us that talent can come from anywhere and that kindness can change everything. Please welcome Lily." The applause filled the hall as she stepped out under the lights. For a moment, she felt her legs go weak. The lights were bright and all the faces in the crowd blurred together. She took a deep breath, sat at the piano, and placed her hands gently on the keys. The room went silent. The first few notes floated softly through the air, like snowflakes landing on water. She started with a simple melody, one that carried warmth and hope. As she played, memories flashed in her mind. The long nights at the restaurant, the rude laughter from the rich guests, her quiet tears in the back room, and the moment she first played at the gala that changed everything. But now there was no sadness left. Only peace. Her music grew deeper, stronger, telling a story without words. It was the story of falling down and standing back up again, of finding strength in silence and light in the darkest places. Every note carried a piece of her heart. The audience listened in complete stillness. Some closed their eyes. Others leaned forward, caught in the emotion of her playing. When she reached the final note, she let it linger for a few seconds, her fingers trembling slightly before she lifted them from the keys. The hall stayed silent for a heartbeat, then exploded into applause. People stood up, cheering, clapping, some even wiping their eyes. Lily stood slowly and bowed, her eyes shining with tears. It wasn't pride she felt, and it was gratitude. Gratitude for the journey, for the people who believed in her, and even for those who hadn't, because they had unknowingly pushed her to find her strength. As she walked backstage, she was greeted by the event organizer, smiling widely. "That was breathtaking," he said. "You didn't just play on, you spoke to every soul in that room." Mr. Lewis came rushing up next, clapping his hands. "You did it, Lily. You made us all proud." She laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "I still can't believe this is real." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You earned every bit of it. You stayed humble, you worked hard, and you never stopped believing, even when life tried to make you small." Later that evening, after the event ended, Lily found herself outside the hall, walking slowly through the falling snow. The city was quiet now, and the air was cold but calm. She held her small scarf close around her neck and looked up at the sky. It was strange. Just a few months ago, she had felt invisible, like no one saw her. Now she realized something powerful. People notice you not when you shout, but when you shine quietly, being true to yourself. The next day, the newspapers and social media were filled with clips of her performance. Words like "heart of the city" and "the waitress who played her way into people's hearts" appeared in headlines. But Lily didn't chase interviews or fame. Instead, she returned to her usual rhythm, working a few shifts at the restaurant, teaching music to children, and playing small shows for charity. She found happiness in the little things, seeing her students learn their first melody, hearing laughter at the cafe where she played on weekends, and watching people close their eyes as she played soft tunes that made them smile. One day, while teaching a young girl how to play scales, the girl looked up and asked, "Do you think I'll ever be as good as you?" Lily smiled warmly. "You'll be even better. You just have to play with your heart." The little girl nodded, her eyes sparkling. Time moved on and life became peaceful again. But one evening, as she finished her shift, a familiar group of people walked into the restaurant. It was the same group of wealthy guests who had mocked her that night so long ago. For a moment, her heart jumped. She wondered if they would even recognize her.